Welcome to another cloud project where we're going to get hands-on and we're going to go over how to set up Okta as an identity provider and integrate it with AWS Identity Center. But before we get into the configuration process, let's talk about why a company would want to integrate Okta as an identity provider with AWS Identity Center. Well, for starters, when a company decides to set Okta as their primary identity provider when integrating with AWS Identity Center, you get three powerful benefits. One being simplified access management, whereas all of your identities are stored in one location, which would be Okta, since it's acting as the primary identity provider. So all of your users will be stored in Okta, making it super easy and simple to manage user access in one central location, which is Okta. Two, it enforces multi-factor authentication, or MFA for short, ensuring that only authorized users get access to the AWS platform and resource. And then third, it automates the user provisioning and the deprovisioning process with the SCIM protocol, which makes it super easy to keep AWS secure and access up to date. So with those three powerful benefits, let's talk about what resources we're going to be using in this project. For one, we're going to be using Okta as our identity provider, and I'm going to show you how to set up SCIM within Okta. And then as far as the next tool we're using is AWS Identity Center specifically, and I'm going to show you how to set up SAML. And the objective of this video is to show you how to configure Okta as the identity provider when paired with AWS Identity Center and how it works. Now, I want to mention one thing before we get started. I haven't assigned any permissions or resources to my test users, so at the end, you'll see that we're in the AWS portal, but there aren't any resources available. So without further ado, let's hop into my screen. Okay, so now we're in my screen. Here to the left is my AWS environment, and to the right is my Okta environment. And to start things off, we're going to hop into AWS and we're going to change the identity provider in AWS to an external identity provider. So at the top, search for IAM, and we're going to select IAM Identity Center. Let me make this a little bit bigger. It's a lot on the screen and it can be a bit hard to read. So I'm going to scroll down to IAM Identity Center Setup, and I'm going to select Confirm Identity Source. This is where we can confirm our identity sources, whether it may be internal or external. And as you can see here, we have a summary of our current identity source. And as you can see, it says identity source, which is Identity Center Directory, which is AWS. So it's saying that currently IAM Identity Center is acting as our identity source. And the authentication method is password, provisioning method is direct. So this is some good information to help you get a scope of what is your current identity source. But let's get straight to it. So we're going to go to Actions, Change Identity Source. So right now we have Identity Center Directory as the default. We're going to select External Identity Provider, select Next. All right, so now we have so out of these three URLs, we only need the ACS and the issuer URL. That will configure the SSO or SAML protocol within Okta. So we're going to hop into Okta and then go to Menu, go to Applications, Browse App Catalog, search for AWS IAM, select AWS IAM Identity Center, add integration, and then I'm going to name mine, AWS to Okta, and you can name yours whatever you like. This is going to be my name, select done. Okay, so now we're here within the application. Now we need to configure the SAML. So again, we need these two URLs and we need to plug them into our Okta application. So we need to go to Sign In, Edit, see where it says AWS SSO ACS URL and the issuer URL. This is where these URLs will go. So we'll copy the ACS and place that here in Okta. Same thing for the issuer URL, and then we'll select Save. Okay, so let's scroll a little bit downward in Okta, and you'll see SAML signing certificates. This is the section where we need to configure the SAML with the Okta metadata. So we're going to go to the AWS environment and scroll downward. And now it says identity provider metadata and the SAML signing certificate. So now we need to take this information right, the SAML signing certificate information, which is the identity provider metadata information from Okta, and plug that into AWS. How do we find that information? Well, if we go to actions, we can view the IdP metadata. So let's select that. And here is our metadata XML file. This is where we can get the IdP sign-in URL and the IdP issuer URL. So let's find the sign-in URL, and that's always going to be towards the bottom. So look for single sign-on service binding. And if you go a little bit further down, you should see HTTPS, and it should start with dev, and the URL will end with SAML. You want to copy that entire URL. Make sure you have the HTTPS, like the entire URL copied, because if you leave off a letter, you're going to get an error and you're going to have to redo everything over. So ensures the entire URL. You can paste that here, and we're going to find the issuer URL towards the top. So where you see entity ID, we have an HTTP URL right here. We're going to copy that. And the same thing goes, you want to make sure you're copying the entire URL, or else the configuration will error out and it will not work. Next, we can close this out, and we need to upload the IdP certificate into AWS. This is a very important piece to this configuration. Without the certificate, the configuration won't work, so we need to add that. So go back to actions in Okta, download the certificate. All right, choose file, and then get the cert, open it, next. All right, so this is just a message in AWS saying that, hey, there are consequences to this change you're about to make. Are you aware of that? This is what's going to happen. I'm going to accept. And then change identity source. Okay, cool. So now we've successfully changed the identity source from IAM Identity Center to the external provider, which is Okta. So we can close this out. All right. So the next thing we need to do is set up the SCIM protocol, which is going to be automatic provisioning between Okta and AWS. So for instance, whenever I add a new user in the Okta environment, that user will reflect in AWS, ensuring that that user is authorized to use the AWS resources. So we're going to scroll down, and where it says automatic provisioning, we're going to select enable, and we're going to take this SCIM endpoint, and we're going to hop back into Okta, go to provisioning, configure API integration, enable it. We're going to place the SCIM endpoint URL here for the base URL, grab that token, and we're going to test the API credentials. All right, as you can see, it was successful. Select save. We can close out of that in AWS. So now we've set up the SCIM protocol between AWS and Okta, and that's going to ensure that there's a seamless identity transference between Okta and AWS, ensuring that all authorized users and they have permission to access the AWS resources from the Okta dashboard. And let me take it a step further. Not all users in Okta will have access to the AWS resources. We're going to actually assign a group to this Okta application, but let me stay on track here. So next we need to actually set up the provisioning to the app. So now a second ago I said the SCIM automates the user provisioning and deprovisioning between Okta and AWS. So in order for that to work properly, we need to actually enable that functionality to provision from Okta to the AWS application. So we'll select edit, enable create users, enable update user attributes, and enable deactivate users. So what that means is if that same user I added in the Okta organization and they reflect in AWS, if I were to deactivate that user in Okta, that same status would show in AWS. So I'm going to show you how that works. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to set up a new user. We're going to set up a new group, and we're going to assign that group to this application. So let's do it. So in Okta, we're going to go to the menu. We're going to go to directory, people. I'm going to add a person. All right. So whenever you create a new user, you want to refresh the screen for them to show in your list. All right, so we're gonna go to groups, add a group. We're gonna say AWS to Okta. That's going to be the name of the group. Test app group. Give it a description. All right, cool. So now we need to add Vaughn to this group. Select that plus, done. Okay, so now if I go to applications, we don't see any applications here, right? But let's assign applications, and we're gonna assign the AWS to Okta application to this group. Save and go back, done. Now we have the AWS and Okta application assigned to this group, which means that Vaughn should actually be showing. Vaughn should be showing in AWS. Vaughn should have been sent over to AWS. So let's take a look. So if we go to the menu in AWS, go to users. So right now, Vaughn doesn't show, right? But let's refresh the users in AWS and let's see what happens. So Vaughn has been added to the AWS environment. Status is enabled, and the user was created by SCIM, which is the automated provisioning and deprovisioning protocol we created a couple minutes ago. But now that we know that, we can go back here. Let's go back to Okta. Let's go to applications. All right. So let's say, so now that Vaughn has been assigned access to the AWS resources, right? She's been provisioned and added to AWS. Now let's see if Vaughn has the AWS app icon in her dashboard, and let's see what happens when she tries to access that app from her dashboard. So we're going to log out of the admin account. We'll log in into Vaughn's account. Okay, cool. So look, Vaughn has the AWS app icon on her dashboard, which means the application was set up properly between Okta and AWS. Now, let's see what happens when we click this icon. Okay, we're going to put that password in. Okay, now it's asking us to set up the Okta Verify app, which is an authentication app for Okta for MFA. So I'm just scanning this QR code on my app on my phone. Okay, we're not going to set up the security question. So select continue. The authentication is happening, and boom, Vaughn now has access to the AWS Access Portal. Like I stated earlier in the video, I haven't assigned any resources to my test user, but the fact that Vaughn is able to log into the AWS Access Portal shows that everything was done correctly. And if I had assigned some resources, we would see them listed here. So now let's take it a step further. Let's actually clean up our mess. Since we know that Vaughn has been provisioned to access AWS resources, everything worked out well. We want to actually remove Vaughn from the AWS environment. We don't want her to have access, and we need to remove her from our Okta environment. So let's do it. So we're going to log out of Vaughn's access portal, and we're going to log back into my admin portal in Okta. So let me show you how Vaughn's account status will change once I deactivate Vaughn in the Okta environment. So we're going to go to the menu, go to directory, people, iamvoncook, more actions, deactivate. So as you can see, the application is gone now. Her status is deactivated. So let me refresh in AWS and let's see what happens. Disabled. That is the power of the SCIM protocol that we configured. Now that Vaughn has been disabled, Vaughn will no longer have access to the AWS Access Portal we just logged out of. So now we're just going to delete Vaughn from the Okta environment since we don't need that user anymore. Just refresh the screen and now Vaughn is gone. And we can do the same in AWS. Delete the user. Now, since we've deleted Von and removed Von's access from AWS, let's actually revert the identity provider from Okta back to AWS IAM Identity Center. So what we're going to do is we're going to go right here where it says IAM Identity Center, scroll downward, go to IAM Identity Center setup, confirm identity source. Make this a little bit bigger so you can see. All right, so remember I said that this is where you can get a summary of your current identity source and the authentication method and provisioning method. Well, as you can see, it's set to external identity provider. And the authentication method is SAML 2.0, which we configured. And the provisioning method is SCIM, which we've configured as well. So we know that we want to change this information. We want to change this to the IAM Identity Center. So we need to go to Actions, change identity source. And as you can see, external is selected. All we need to do is select Identity Center Directory, select Next, accept, change identity source. And then boom, you've successfully changed the identity source from external IDP to IAM Identity Center. We can even confirm that right here. It says Identity Center Directory is the primary identity source. The authentication method changed back to password, and the provisioning method is now direct again. So that is how you revert back to the identity center in AWS. All right, so let's actually delete the application in Okta. So we'll go to menu, go to applications, and then here is my AWS and Okta application. I'll just simply hit the down arrow, deactivate, and we're done. Now, if I want to take it a step further and delete it, just go to the inactive tab, select delete. So I hope that you've gained a lot of value from this video. If you have any questions, you need me to confirm or clarify anything, please drop me a message in the comments, and I'll be more than happy to get back to you. I really thank you for your time, and as always, be blessed.